Another week, another edition of New York Sports Rapid Rundown. Things are heating up as we get deeper into the spring, and the playoffs for basketball and hockey are just right around the corner. Exciting times, guys. This week, joining me to talk about the hottest three topics in Big Apple sports is a man who is a golf enthusiast. He is a broadcaster for the PGA Tour and also the host of Eyes on Golf podcast, the one and only Jeff Eisenband. Jeff, what's going on, man?
I'm excited. I love to talk about golf, Dex, but I'm excited to talk about New York sports right now, a true passion.
Well, that's it. And when we first connected, we first met, which is years ago, I know you're a big New York sports fan. You grew up rooting for a lot of the teams in the area. You're from the area. So, yeah, we can't just limit you to golf.
Yeah, totally objective journalist now, obviously, as you'd imagine.
Yes.
But, no, I mean, listen, you're right. I mean, I've had a lot of different hats in my career, but there are so many pressing topics right now in New York sports as we we're talking before we went on the air, right? Baseball oozing in to basketball and hockey right now, so a lot going on.
A lot is going on. We say that every week, that a lot's going on. A lot is going on. And, Jeff, what a week in New York sports, because the Knickerbockers, they're closing the season strong. Jalen Brunson, folks, is out here getting buckets consistently. The Rangers, well, they had a rough week, but they still can reach some goals as far as playoff positioning. But first, we're going to talk some baseball, which you just mentioned. Jeff, the New York Mets, their offense looked anemic to start the season, but broke out earlier this week. They took 2 out of 3 from the Braves on Thursday, 16-4 rout down in the ATL. Are you a believer now in the Mets offense, an offense that soon will add J.D. Martinez to the lineup? Are you a believer in this Mets offense?
I think you have to be, right? I mean, the 0-5 start, you weren't sure what you were going to get. You didn't even mention stopping the Kansas City Royals' winning streak last night. So just incredible stuff from the Mets right now. And to me, what makes the difference is, Pete Alonso, Francisco Lindor, they're going to hit at points this season. It's the bottom of the lineup. But what sort of Jeff McNeil are we going to get? Are we going to get an all-star version of him? Francisco Alvarez, Harrison Bader comes in. How will these guys produce? And as the Mets have gotten hot in the last week and a half, those guys have been the guys figuring it out. And when they get J.D. Martinez, we'll talk about that, Dex. The question I think Mets fans need to understand, he's not going to be necessarily the 3 or 4 hitter that you're looking for in the lineup, but he can be an outstanding 5 or 6 hitter in this lineup and propel this lineup even more.
Which should excite you, because you've seen how the Mets have been smacking the ball all over the yard. You've seen some of the young guys produce. You mentioned Alvarez, you mentioned Beatty. That's got to excite you if you're a Mets fan, and then you're adding J.D. Martinez. So things can only get better for the Mets, who were struggling to score runs, and now, of late, they look like an offensive machine.
You would think so. The pitching is not going to be what we've seen from Mets teams of old, so you're going to need to produce hitting. And I think you look at the Marlins, right? The Mets and Marlins both started off slow, and now we're seeing, in 2 weeks of the MLB season, 2 teams going in different directions. And the Mets have figured it out down the order, which I think is really the important part. They didn't lose their composure. It's early. You're playing 162 games in a season. To get that momentum, taking 2 out of 3 from the Braves, who are dealing with their own issues right now. I mean, we're coming this morning, Spencer Strider out for the season. So all of a sudden, this division looks a little bit different as things open up. Mets fans still probably temper your expectations right now. There's 6 teams that make the playoffs in the National League, and that's a big deal. This isn't, 1993. This is now, we're in 2024, and I think the Mets are going to hang around as the year progresses to those wild card spots.
So that's the interesting thing here, right? Because I'm sure you saw this, I'm sure you heard this. Some Mets fans were ready to jump out the window because of the 0-5 start. But considering how the Metropolitans started this season, 0-5, the question here for Mets fans is, should Mets fans be encouraged with how they've turned this thing around, winning 6 out of their last 8 games at the time of us taping this, or should there be cautious optimism with this team?
I just think with baseball, I mean, of course, you're right on the cusp there, right? Right. I think you shouldn't have cautious optimism the way the Mets are playing, because baseball is such a fickle sport that players, like, you don't know if Beatty and Alvarez, what sort of young players are going to show up. And all of a sudden, if those guys are showing up, you change the complexion of the entire season. I don't think the Mets should be sellers at the trade deadline, because they have invested in this team. So at this point, it's hard to determine yourself a seller when it feels like they have put some pieces on the field that should be part of a playoff team, that they have tried to get into one of those top 6 positions. So you're going to see as this year goes on, and that's where you're going to ask Jose Quintana, Luis Severino, what sort of production are you going to get out of them pitching-wise? Because that's probably the piece that the Mets will look for if they're in playoff position come around the trade deadline, a pitcher is what they're going to be looking for out there.
And I think pitching was the concern of most people just covering the Mets and Mets fans themselves. What was that going to be with this team? The offense now, the way they looked, I think is what people thought they could be. But it's reason for at least Mets fans to be somewhat encouraged. We'll see if that encouragement stays, because it's a long baseball season, you know, Jeff. It can go up, it can go down, and it can be a whole bunch of different places.
And Francisco Lindor still has to hit. That's a little bit of the X factor right now. That's the guy who really has to get going.
Yeah, Francisco Lindor has to get going. But for right now, the Mets, 6 wins in their last 8 games. Fans have to be pretty happy. Let's talk some basketball. The New York Knicks, they have clinched home court in the first round of the playoffs. Jeff, they're looking to lock up at least the 3 seed
incredible
in the East in the playoffs this week. I do think it's incredible, right? They picked up some big wins on the road this week, at Milwaukee, at Chicago, at Boston, probably the most impressive one, considering all the injuries that the Knicks have had this season and they've dealt with. How impressed are you with where the team is right now, and what do you think it would mean for them to get to 50 wins, lock up a top 3 seed, and possibly even finish with the 2nd seed?
I'm 30 years old. This is the most impressed I've ever been with a Knicks team in my life. And I think that's not to make you feel you know, you saw 10 extra years.
I've seen some better years, but yes.
But I think that what the Knicks have been able to do with all of the injuries and everything that they've been thrown at them. And remember, I go back to that stretch when they were playing the Nuggets and the Heat, you know, beat the Nuggets by more than 30 at home. We're beating the Heat, the game that Julius Randle got injured, to go on, I believe, a 7-game winning streak at the time. I mean, that was the peak of Knicks basketball. But to be able to respond the way that they have, that Jalen Brunson went from being an all-star player to an MVP caliber player in the last few months. A guy like Josh Hart, who asked for all the playing time at the beginning of the year and got it, has responded. The way the Knicks have done is incredible. And I think Tom Thibodeau, when you think about what he has done with rosters, this is so reminiscent to me of those Heat teams that lost Derrick Rose and still got home court when the playoffs came around. And you're going, how is this even possible? Because, you know, I think it speaks to Tibbs getting everything out of guys on the roster. Isaiah Hartenstein, Precious Achiuwa, Miles McBride, guys who at the beginning of the year you expected, I mean, Precious wasn't even on the team, but you're expecting to maybe play a role off the bench. Miles McBride really not even quite in the rotation at the beginning of the year. And these are guys who are legitimate pieces on a team that, as we talk, has a legitimate chance to get the number 2 seed in the Eastern Conference if the Knicks take care of business at the Bulls and the reeling Bucks were to fall to the Magic.
It's amazing. You got to give credit to what Coach Tom Thibodeau has done and how he's turned all the points he hit on are great, and I think he's gotten the most out of the players that he would like to get the most out of, and that helps. That speaks a lot to culture. I was talking to somebody about this before, but I think that speaks a lot to the culture of this team. But leading the culture of this team, whether you want to say it's Tom Thibodeau, you can't talk about the culture of this team without talking about Jalen Brunson.
It's unbelievable.
And Jalen Brunson, guys, he has been cooking. On Thursday, he missed his 3rd straight 40-point game by 1 point when he finished with 39 against the Celtics. Now, he's carried this Knicks team for most of this season, but he's also raised the level of the play of the guys around him. Where do you see Brunson finishing in the MVP race, and do you think he's a lock for an All-NBA team?
Well, he's a lock for an All-NBA team. You know, I don't know if he's going to be able to break into that first team. There's going to be a lot of debate coming down the pipeline about that. You look at the actual MVP voting, and then it becomes, well, why not Brunson first team? Because you really have Luka Doncic, Nikola Jokic, and Giannis Antetokounmpo ahead of him. And all of a sudden you're looking around and thinking, has he inched his way onto that first team? If that's the only discussion, then he's the second guard on that list. So, you know, I think what Brunson has done, it's not just, you talk about the scoring. And you talk about the leadership. It's not just that. Against the Nets after that Celtics game, Jalen Brunson didn't score in the first quarter. He was not having a strong performance, but he was still finding a way to get assists, which he doesn't do every night. And I think that's the mark of a great player who's able to recognize, okay, it's the second night of a back-to-back. You know, this is the game we're going to play. It's going to be a slog tonight against the Nets. But he was able to figure it out, and then he finished the game 7 of 7 from the free throw line, hit some big free throws down the stretch, did his job, doesn't have to light up the box score every night to be the mark of a great player on a great team. No,
I think you're right about that. That's usually, and there's been a lot of discussion about what is Jalen Brunson? Is he a star? Is he a superstar? I think that's the mark of a superstar there. Somebody who brings it every night, finds a way to win, is able to elevate the play of the other guys. So let me ask you this as a follow-up. What's your vibes? I know we're one game left in the season. What's your vibes with this Knicks team as they are approaching the playoffs?
Yeah.
Do you think they can make a legitimate deep run further than they did last year, maybe go to the Eastern Conference Finals?
Well, I think you can't talk about the playoff run without talking about the rest of the Eastern Conference right now. And the fact of the matter is the East is pretty depleted. We're not sure what Giannis we're going to get in the playoffs. Joel Embiid last night, as we talked, left the game, came back in the game. What exactly is going on with him in Philadelphia? Are the Heat going to be that playoff team that we've seen in past years? It feels like, other than the Boston Celtics, the Eastern Conference is very open. And the New York Knicks are the hottest team in the Eastern Conference right now, perhaps you could say, other than the Celtics. So as long as the Knicks are able to be that 2 or 3 seed, that's going to go a long way. You don't want to get ahead of yourself, but for the Knicks not having to play the Celtics in the second round of the playoffs. And to me, after that, especially if the Bucks don't get a healthy Giannis back, the Knicks should be favored against everyone that they're playing the rest of the way. And if they're able to get that Madison Square Garden home court for those first two rounds of the playoffs, then I don't think you can pick against the Knicks right now the way that they're playing. They can't, another injury can't come because already without Julius Randle, the Knicks can't really have an OG Anunoby or an Isaiah Hartenstein, who's been so instrumental for them in the paint this season. They can't lose a player like that. But right now, the way the rosters are, the Knicks should be getting to that Eastern Conference Finals with the Celtics.
Ooh, Knicks fans are going to like that optimism around the Knicks. They give it optimism.
But it's hard not to, and you don't want to have pessimism too.
Right.
The pessimism of it is, well, look at these other rosters. I think the Orlando Magic and Indiana Pacers should probably fear Knicks fans more. Knicks fans should be afraid of more right now than a Philadelphia 76ers or a Miami Heat, just the way those teams are playing.
Very interesting. Going to be very interesting Eastern Conference. It's going to be a very interesting close to the season, the way the standings are so jumbled up throughout the NBA. That'll close on Sunday. We'll see how it all plays out. But the Knicks fans and Knicks, Jeff's bringing the optimism. Maybe you should be optimistic too. Maybe you just should be. All right, we go from the hardwood. We are going to take it to the ice. The New York Rangers, they failed to take the necessary steps to lock up both the Eastern Conference and the Metropolitan Division this week. Now, folks, the Blue Shirts, they dropped back-to-back games of regulation for the first time since January after they lost to the Islanders and Flyers this week. They are now just a point ahead of the Hurricanes in the Metro, and they have a little bit of a lead over the Bruins in the East, right? Both of these teams, all these teams have 2 games left to play. As we're recording this, the Rangers will play the Islanders, and shortly they'll be down to 1 game left to play. The Rangers still control their own destiny here with a magic number of 4.
Yeah.
But how concerned are you about what we saw from them in their recent play this week?
I know you just said I'm expressing too much optimism, but I'm not concerned. I'm really not, because the Rangers started as the hottest team in hockey this year. They had a big win in the fall over the Bruins to get to the most amount of points through 25, 30 or so games in the season. And then they went through a lull in the middle of the season. But the way they responded in the last 2 months really impressed me to get in that driver's seat. Like you said, they control home ice for the Eastern Conference playoffs. They control their own destiny for home ice for the Eastern Conference playoffs right now. They could easily win the President's Trophy. They've done an outstanding job responding to everything. So 2 losses down the stretch, to me, it's just another bump in the season, because the Rangers right now, not only are they healthy, they're getting healthier. There's a report that Philip Hedl, who hasn't played most of the season, might even come back for the playoffs. I don't know if the Rangers even need to do that right now. I don't know how much he can add to this team. It adds depth, but that's incredible to know how healthy the Rangers are going to become. And we were talking before we went on air, I can't believe that the Carolina Hurricanes and the Florida Panthers are ahead of the Rangers on the odds board to win the Eastern Conference. I understand the Hurricanes are hot right now. They have a better goal differential than the Rangers. But you're talking about the Rangers, in all likelihood, having home ice for the postseason, having home ice for that Carolina Hurricanes series, which would be the second-round series, assuming these two would meet. So I think the Rangers are getting some disrespect right now from the books. I
was going to ask you that. Should they take this as disrespect? Is this something that could be bulletin board material for Peter Laviolette and the guys going forward in the playoffs? Because they're not showing them love, at least from the books, that is.
I think the bulletin board material is, look what you guys did last year against the New Jersey Devils, when you felt like you had this team that could go for a run. And we all thought, everyone in New York thought that was the team last year. And now it appears this team is much better than that team. This team has been much more consistent during the season. You're going to get the play out of Artemi Panarin. You're probably getting a more consistent Igor Shesterkin in the second half of the season. And then I look at a player like Mika Zibanejad. We were talking about Francisco Lindor with the Mets. Zibanejad is the type of guy where, you could argue the second best player on this team offensively. Where he goes, this team will go. He's getting hotter, 7 points in his last 6 games, seems to be playing more consistent hockey. The Rangers have the second best power play right now in the NHL. Some of that ability to score goals during the playoffs, especially from a guy like Zibanejad, from guys like Kreider and Trocheck outside of Panarin, that's going to be what will make the Rangers go in the playoffs.
And so that's the thing, right? We can talk about all this, but it comes down to the playoffs. So let's say this. Let's say the Rangers take care of business. Let's say they lock up the President's Trophy. How do you feel about this team heading into the playoffs? And should we look at this group as a Stanley Cup or bust squad? Is that the way we need to look at this Rangers group?
We do. And I hate ever saying that in sports because it's all about percentages and one team wins. In hockey, there's 32 teams, only one team wins. But this is the best Rangers team that we've seen since the last team that made that run to the 2014 Stanley Cup and then was able to get home ice in the Eastern Conference the following year. I mean, this is the most consistent team. This is a team that has one of the best goaltenders in the NHL, is playing with one of the best offenses in the NHL, has one of the best, can become one of the best defensive teams in the NHL, one of the deepest teams in the NHL, is going to have home ice. You don't get those opportunities every year in the playoffs, especially, like you said, if they have home ice, if they win the President's Trophy, then you got to go. And you got to take advantage of because you don't know where you're going to be next year. So I do think Rangers fans should have that pressure. We just talked about basketball. Hockey is much more fickle in the playoffs than basketball. Home ice doesn't seem to matter as much in history. A bounce can go one or two ways. The goals, it's a little bit that margin for error is so narrow. But the Rangers have the deep team, and a depth is so important in the playoffs. When you can go into lines 3 and 4 and still play stellar playoff hockey, that can be a big difference, and that's what the Rangers have right now.
You're right. Sometimes it's about the depth. Sometimes it's also about the hot goaltending. That's how fickle, as you said, the playoffs can be. But you're optimistic about the Rangers?
I'm optimistic, and you mentioned goaltending, so let's just put it out there at the beginning. Igor Shesterkin did not have the best first half of the season. Rangers fans were looking around saying, should Jonathan Quick actually be in here? And since the All-Star break, Igor has responded. In the last week, there have been some shaky moments, but Igor has responded. I'm not saying that he's back in that top 5 goaltender in the NHL realm, but I would put him top 10, and all of a sudden, that is creating the ability for him to rise to that level in the playoffs. It's like facing a pitcher in baseball, right? An ace who's had a good season, but all of a sudden you get to the playoffs. No one wants to face an ace in the playoffs. No one wants to face a guy who has the potential to be the best goaltender in the NHL in the playoffs, and that's what Igor Shesterkin is.
No doubt about that. We will see how the Rangers do in the postseason coming up shortly for them. Knicks 1 game left, Rangers 2 games left, 1 after this drops on Saturday. But you see from Jeff, it's optimism. Optimism for the Mets, optimism for the Knicks, and optimism for the Rangers. Okay, we got bonus time here. Jeff, there was no way I was going to let you leave the studio without talking about some golf. I have to do it. Masters going on this weekend. Tiger Woods, impressive first 2 rounds. Made the cut for the 24th consecutive Masters that he's played in. That is amazing in itself, right? We just got to. That is amazing. Now, you know this.
Yeah.
There's always the aura around Tiger, right? Being the legend that he is, somebody who's won 6 green jackets. Do you think that Tiger has another Masters win in him? Not this year, but do you think he's got at least one more time that we can see him throw on that green jacket?
48 hours ago, before the tournament started, I would have said no chance to you. Huh. And now being able to watch Tiger these first 2 days, I've totally changed my tune on Tiger Woods. He's 1 over, 7 shots off the lead as we go into the weekend. But what has impressed me specifically about Augusta National is it's a course where obviously Tiger Woods has been playing since 1995. And he is not going to be able to keep up with these guys in terms of distance. He's just not anymore. He's 48 years old. But he was perhaps the most impressive player in the field around the greens and putting in the first 2 days of the tournament, which, as long as you can still be out there playing golf, get into, in Tiger's case, his backyard, most people actually going to a practice range to work on their game, you can just continue to work and compete with your short game. If the PGA Tour was a pitch and putt, Tiger Woods would still be able to be the best player in the world. And so what Tiger did at Augusta National so far is showed his course knowledge that he can play. At one point when he was finishing his day on Thursday, darkness was coming. The players had the option. They didn't have to finish the hole they were on. Tiger was finishing the hole, and the commentators, Curtis Strange, who was one of the commentators, said, of course, he knows the entire course mapped out in his head. So I think Augusta National, the Masters, is probably the major that he'll have the best chance to win down the road. You could argue the Open Championship golf in Europe is much flatter than in the United States, but he needs to both be able to know the course and be able to walk the course. And at the Masters, at Augusta National, he feels comfortable. Phil Mickelson won a major at almost 51.
Yep.
Tiger's still 3 years away from that, so he's got a little bit of a runway if healthy.
And he could do that. I think what's still so impressive to me is with his health the last couple of years, he's got to walk this. That's another thing. Knows the course. But folks, walking a golf course and playing that takes a lot. I know sometimes people don't think that. But how impressive his short game still has been. He has not lost anything on that, right, in terms of the putting and the percentages that he's able to complete here. Do we think that there's another resurgence of him? I know he'll never be the Tiger that he was, Jeff. That's ridiculous to expect, right, at 48 years old. But there's another resurgence where we see him healthy, if that's the main thing for him, and seeing him play consistently good golf?
So he said at the beginning of this year that he was the healthiest he has been really since his car accident a couple of years ago, the latest car accident that happened in February in winter of 2021. And he wanted to play a tournament one tournament every month this year. He had a little bit of a food poisoning illness at the first event he played at the Genesis Invitational in February, which stopped him from playing in March. But he says it's not a physical issue. He says that was just an illness and decided to take some time off. So if he's able to physically compete and is actually more physically full right now than he was the last couple of years, then we can see Tiger Woods continue to compete. I don't think we'll have a resurgence, but what Tiger has said is he does not want to be a ceremonial golfer. When he shows up, he wants to show up because he thinks he can win. And I think that Tiger will show up thinking that he can win and actually getting people's hopes up and being around leaderboards like he's tied for 22nd as we start the third round of the Masters. Today, he will be able to do that more over the next 3 to 5 years than I would have expected a year ago.
And I'm happy with that because I don't know how you feel about it, but I think it's good for golf when he's around the leaderboard. I think it's good when he's still competitive, even if he gives you the faint hope, right, getting people's hopes up that he can make a Tiger charge on a Sunday or something like that. I think it's good for the sport. Who did you predict to win the Masters?
I predicted Xander Schauffele. I probably would be off on that right now. Scottie Scheffler is the guy who's tied for the lead as we enter Saturday, who has been the best player in the world by a significant margin the last few weeks. And the fact that he has put himself in position soundly, didn't make a bogey in the first round, has played some outstanding golf. And despite all the scrutiny that was on him, despite the Tiger Woods-esque comparisons that were being made, he's tied for the lead going into the weekend. So I think you'd have to be crazy to consider anyone else right now other than Scottie Scheffler.
Yeah, Scheffler, one of the best in the game right now. One of the best people talking sports, not just golf. Just want to let the people know, my guy, Jeff Eisenband, catch him on the broadcaster on the PGA Tour, also the host of Eyes on Golf. Really great podcast there around golf. But, Jeff, one, I got to thank you for coming here on the New York Sports Rapid Rundown. We got to have you back because you have such a wealth of knowledge about all sports and New York sports. I know you're passionate about, man. So it's good we got to connect. I hadn't seen you in a while, and we got to have you back on the show.
Spread it around, Olympics, NFL season, whatever. We'll talk badminton, handball, whatever we have to talk over the summer.
There we go. Any sport you want, this guy can do it. That is Jeff Eisenband. Check out his work, and we will see you guys next week on the New York Sports Rapid Rundown.